Hello, my name's Dale Adams, and on this Pat Chat today, I'm going to be speaking with Jennifer. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi Dale, my name is Jennifer McConnell. I'm the founder of Living Legacy. I'm based and from Ireland. And Living Legacy was created as a way to help organizations get their plans in place through succession planning and strategy reviews. And then for individuals to get their end of life plans in place and advanced plans to ensure that they actually can then make space for their life and I suppose their business yet to live.
Okay, well, when you talk of business succession planning, it was something that we decided that we'd have a chat about today because it's quite an unusual service, I think, especially when it's relating solely towards end of life, which obviously your organisation is.
So with the succession planning, I came into succession planning because I come from a human resource management background. So I had the great fortune to work in very unusual countries, and I worked for a telecoms business. So obviously their focus is things like business continuity. And I was working in Haiti as human resources director for a telecoms business. And we wanted to see how we could localize the roles. So less reliance on international staff and more focus on developing local staff. And that was my first introduction to succession planning. Then over the years, that was something that I incorporated into most of my work, and to ensure that I always had my successor identified, or at least the systems in place if somebody was to step in, if I had vacated the role. In 2021, then I was invited by an international development agency to do succession mapping. And that was with that element of who are the key roles and who's in those roles and who has the potential to take on those roles in the future. So that was a really interesting insight as well, to look at something that was an organization spread across 10 different countries. How do they actually ensure that they can always meet the demands and the needs of the communities that they serve? When I then launched Living Legacy, succession planning was very much to the fore of my mind, because I do believe that while death definitely is a certainty, also succession, because regardless of the role that we're in, whether it's working for somebody else or working for ourselves, we want to always ensure that the work we do can continue on beyond us. So how do we actually prepare the people then to follow? With the succession plan and the end of life planning, I suppose the similarity is mainly to do with family businesses. So where you would have somebody that has run their own business and is considering who they then pass that business on to in the family, excuse me, it also can look at maybe somebody in the family doesn't want to take on the business. Maybe there is somebody else that's better suited to the work. Maybe the organization is coming to a natural conclusion when the founder itself goes. But also when you look at things like charities, social enterprises, they can often suffer from founder syndrome, where it's always going to be the founder that feels they have to stay till the bitter end and that the organization couldn't survive without them. So this is where that whole focus of, I suppose, the operational side of succession planning comes in, but also to ensure that you do think of the fact that people do move on from roles, they leave organizations, and people do inevitably die. So how do we prepare an organization to ensure that it can be future-proofed for the long run?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic to me. It's two-pronged, really, because I have my own businesses. I have done for many, many years. And at one point, my children basically stated that they were not interested. And so it was all organised around the sales director at the time and how they would be the person that would take it over from me. And we needed to make sure that was put into the will in relation to sort of shares and business interests and things. So I have actually gone through it to a level. And then the other side of it is, more recently, I was talking to somebody and it is considered that she will take on her father's business, but she's absolutely not interested. And yet she works within the business and the conversation is always around her taking it on, but she does not want to take it on. And so it's creating this problem because every time she brings up that she doesn't want it, it's sort of considered, well, it's expected, you should have it. So there are two sides to it from me of how interesting it is and why I wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's down to, well, like, you and I both focus on like end of life planning, how we can support people to get their plans in place. But a lot of it is down to the certainty of what you actually want your legacy to be. So if you want that legacy of keeping the family business running, moving it forward, passing it on to your next generation, then that's great. But even with that, you may have somebody that begrudgingly takes on a business, but the energy that's then brought to the business will actually impact how the business performs. So realistically, if somebody doesn't want it, that's going to be felt by the team. The person themselves is going to really resent taking on that role. And the person that they've taken over from, that relationship in some ways potentially fractures. So it is that thing of being clear in the intention of, well, why are they so insistent on her taking that role if she's repeatedly said she doesn't want it? And is it the fear of, well, if we give it to somebody outside of the family, we no longer have control? A lot of it is then really looking at that sense of the communication and also the values. If we're looking at anything to do with what's important to us, whether in life or in business, where are the values being met in terms of how we are living it, how we are working it, how we're embodying it, and also in terms of the people that we are surrounding ourselves, in terms of how we fulfill the life that we want to live. With succession planning, it can be quite hard because, again, there's so many opportunities now in the world that it's no longer a guarantee that if somebody joins your business that they're going to stay indefinitely. Generations before, you took that job and it was a job for life. Now it is a case of somebody may stay 2 to 3 years and that's good going, but realistically they may then want to go on to something else. The industries that probably struggle the most are farmers, fishers, and also like with regard to things like funeral directors, these are tough jobs, and it's a lot of manual work. It's a lot of, unscheduled hours, and people rely so heavily on you that trying to then sell that idea of this is a job that's worthwhile doing to the next generation can often be quite hard to do. So again, how do we look at, okay, if it's not going to be our family member who has that opportunity and that interest to take it on, but then who's the following option? So if your sales director decided, actually, I've just won, a lot of money in the lottery and I'd like to go on a world cruise indefinitely, who do you have as plan B if your plan A doesn't work? And also, it's not necessarily about who wants the job, but who's capable of doing the job, who will actually continue on your vision, but also bring their own vision to it to make it an even richer business beyond you.
And that was something that I was actually going to bring up, because even when you're talking about end of life planning, it's often assumed that it would be children, siblings, who would take on some of the workload in relation to end of life planning and help you with that. But if they don't have the skill set, it's also, they're not the person to choose. And I think this is something that I speak to people about, which is, can they actually do the job? Just because you are related to them, just because you trust them more than anybody else in the world, can they in fact do the role that you are asking them to do? And it's even more important as such when it comes to business, if this is something that obviously, you want to have continue, you want it to be part of your legacy, you want it to continue with an income from your family, because as you rightly say, if somebody doesn't have that energy, if they don't want to do it, if they're filled with resentment, it's not going to stay as a really promising going concern, because they're not going to be able to keep it going if they really don't want it.
Yeah, and I think you've very much touched on a really important point as well. When it's been taken over by somebody because somebody has died, if it's a family member, they're now dealing with it from a place of grief. So it's also what allowances are being made to give them time to adjust to the shock, to the trauma and the upset. And is it like, I suppose the perfect example in terms of succession that there was no choice really given to it is when Queen Elizabeth died. And literally she had died, and then now King Charles III took over. And within 2 days, he had to travel to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, to Wales, to all of the, I'm not too sure what the phrase is or, what the wording is, but he had to go to all of the municipalities as such to basically present himself. And yet this man is a human who's just lost his mother. And it's just that level of, I think the whole ceremony was phenomenal, but it was realistically about, actually, he just had to go straight off into work mode, and yet is not necessarily being allowed to properly grieve the loss of his mother, but also his predecessor. So I think that's the same thing within family businesses. Where are the I suppose, where are there kind of considerations being factored in? So if somebody is to take on, whether it's your end of life planning, whether it's to take over your business, where is there kind of a bit of buffering time that maybe somebody else could step in an acting role just to cushion that kind of blow?
Yeah, because a lot of businesses, the founder or the CEO, however they want to be titled, they are involved every day in everything going on. And especially if they still work as, I would say, as a wheel structure where actually everything revolves around them. It depends on whether they have actually advanced the business to enable them to actually allow it to continue to run without their daily input. And that makes a huge difference as well.
It does. And also, I think factor in, and I was just having this conversation with a few people over the weekend, is when you consider like a family and say the matriarch dies, and all of a sudden there starts to be fractures within the siblings, maybe with the father, with aunts, uncles. But actually, nobody really factored in that, yes, maybe the mother was the glue, but they never factored in that she was also the referee. And it's the same way that within a business, whenever there's a significant change in a business, there's always going to be attrition. You will always lose staff because they don't like change or they don't necessarily agree with the new systems and processes that are being put in place. But it is also that fact of the core person that is now stepping away, whether because of retirement, moving into a different organization, or indeed because they've died. There is a huge shift in terms of now the culture and the practice within the organization to actually determine that, well, actually person not only was there in a day-to-day to deal with the strategy, to deal with the day-to-day responsibilities, but they were also the one that was holding everyone else. So when that person goes, a new person comes in, how equipped are they to hold the team, to hold the clients, to hold the communities that they serve, even in terms of engaging with suppliers? How are they at, I suppose, still honoring the business itself and also ensuring that they're able to not completely obliterate the legacy and the values of the person that came before them, but that they can actually add to it, but also be mindful of the change that's underway for the team as a whole?
Which, even when you talk it through like that, is such a big role to take on, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why with the work of, say, myself in Living Legacy, like I'm not a financial planner, I'm not a legal advisor. So it is always important that when you have things like family businesses, and really, I suppose, anything that involves an estate, is to make sure that you do get the proper tax advice, financial advice, and legal advice to ensure that you've got at least the framework organized, agreed, and formalized. The work that I do is really that step beforehand. How do you ensure that there's thought has been given to all of this, but also to be able to really tease out the concerns, the possibilities, and the opportunities, and ensuring that everybody is singing off the same hymn sheet as such, so that when everything is then formalized, everybody is fully embedded and bought into what the plan is going forward. So if we think about the fact that we've just come through a global pandemic, businesses had to shift direction immediately and quite often without any preparation. So how do they suddenly go online? How do they look after their staff when there was no work to give them? How do they still operate when nobody was allowed to actually move? We have to look at that kind of business continuity piece, that within an organization, regardless of who takes on the senior roles, is what is the mission of the organization, the values, and that long-term vision? Where do you vision your business to be in 20 years' time? Now, inevitably, it will change, but it's that thing of what's the core belief and the principles to ensure that no matter who moves into leadership roles, that they're very clear on what the vision is to ensure that they can still provide that top-class service and best practice to the communities that were always intended to benefit from what you do.
So when somebody comes to you, how does it actually work? Because there's obviously a sort of a process to this. What do they do when they come to you, and what do you do for them? How does it work if somebody wants more information on business succession planning?
What I would tend to do is I would always have that introductory call, have the chat. Who are they? Where are they at within their business? What kind of work have they already done to focus on succession planning? What I find is the main, again, like end of life planning, the main message I always get back is, oh yes, we'll get around to it when we have everything else in place. And you go, well, yeah, that's too late. What you need to do, too late, far too late. And what you really need to do is actually factor succession planning in at the very beginning of your business planning and your strategizing. Because if you think about the fact is, regardless of the development of AI and robots and all of the great technology that's coming into play now, you still need people. You still need people to make those decisions, and you still need people to do manual elements of the organization's function. So when I go to talk to people, quite often they're usually coming to me because they're at that sense of, oh gosh, we have an aging board. We have a CEO that really needs to retire. We have people that have left the organization and we're now stuck. What do we do? And so it's factoring in, I suppose, my background in human resource management, but also my experience in dealing with business continuity. When there's a crisis, what are the core things that actually must happen? And then what are the ideal things that you would like to happen? And then factor those into that kind of plan. With both end of life and succession planning, I will always work with both individuals and groups and start from the very beginning. Who are you? What do you stand for? What are your values? If you get that right, then that means that you've got something that's really the anchor of everything else. And then looking at, with the business, what are the key roles? What are the roles that the business cannot function without? What are the core roles to then support that? And then what are the supporting roles to make sure that everything happens on a day-to-day basis? Ideally, for a founder, for a business owner, for the leadership, you need to be working more on the business rather than in the business. How do you ensure that you're freeing yourself up to be able to do the networking, the meetings, the strategizing, and the real long-term planning, but that you've got a good solid team that can actually enact everything else on the day-to-day, follow the strategic plan, but also contribute to it. Where I probably differ, because I know there are people out there who do succession planning, whether they're human resource consultants, whether they're, legal advisors, whether they're management consultants. We all, I suppose, have our own different approach. The same way with the end of life planning, we all come from it with the intention of the same outcome, but we come from it in a different way. What I would tend to also do is ensure that the whole team is included. So I've worked with businesses that have had 8 staff. I've also worked with businesses that have had 500. And it's to ensure that everybody is aware that this process is actually happening, and also that everybody's role matters and the person in the role is of value. So I suppose one of the main things is that quite often we think of succession as just the higher level. So the board, the CEO, and maybe the directors. But actually, if you manage the business effectively, you're going to be able to move people up through the ranks. So therefore, that starts to move people at a junior level up to maybe a middle level up to senior level up to directors and the leadership. But then ideally, that frees up the more junior roles. How can you then create maybe internship programs, graduate programs? How can you ensure that you're bringing in people that are new energy, new ideas, and maybe more up to date in technical skills and kind of what's going on in the bigger world? So realistically, it's actually looking at the whole organization and then ensuring that there are, like I would always encourage the organization to do surveys. What is everybody's experience working in the organization right now? What works, what doesn't work, and what are the solutions to affect positive change? And then by taking all of that, it really allows to ensure that bringing the human resource element of performance reviews, 360 reviews, and also really looking at bringing in stakeholder analysis as well. What are your suppliers' experience of working with you? What are your community's experience? What are your beneficiaries? If you can actually do all of that, that really gives you a picture of where the business is at right now, because there's no point just saying, well, actually person A is the ideal person to take over from the CEO, when actually there's so many other elements within the business that need to be fixed first, so that you're all collectively part of enforcing this positive change, but that you're bringing everybody along on the journey with you as well.
Yeah. To be honest, everything starts from the foundations. Even when you're speaking, it's all about foundations. And at the end of the day, often that is the junior roles. But it's all about training programs then, because you do need, as the CEO or founder, as you said, and it's always stated to be working on the business, not in it all the time, but so many work in it and they don't put through the training programs necessary to ensure people can actually do the job to the standard required so that they can lift off. Processes and ensuring that those procedures are in place is absolutely crucial. And I think a lot of the time people think, well, it's easier if I do it, it's quicker if I do it. But that's not the case. If you want longevity of a company, you have to make sure that you can build. And obviously, if you can keep your staff, you know, that tacit knowledge is just paramount to a successful, prolonged business. And I think so much now, as you say, when you're losing staff on a higher turnover, something needs to be considered as to why, but equally people do jump for better offers. There's, you know, being headhunted, but you really need to try and keep your team as long as possible, because that gives you the best chance. And I think listening to what you were saying, you were talking about all of the reasons why people obviously need to look at their succession planning. But one of them is, if somebody's given a terminal diagnosis, and it's something that I state a lot within the work that I do, they're planning it through pain. And you and I both agree with that planning ahead is so important. You know, to me, planning ahead of time, that's what it's all about. And when you consider that if somebody has got a business and then they're given a life-limiting prognosis or a terminal diagnosis, suddenly not only are they dealing with themselves and what they're going through and the grief that they are experiencing in their family, they've then got to deal with the business and the planning and everything else, when actually that's when you want to be able to say it's organized. You know, whether it's from the end of life planning or from the business planning, it's organized. Now I can focus on me and my family and what we need through this process. And I think that's what's so important about everything that you and I are doing. Even though, as you say, we are looking at things from slightly different angles. I don't do anything with business succession planning, which is why it's lovely to speak to you about it and for people to hear about it. But at the end of the day, it's all about planning, isn't it?
It really is. And I think the other thing as well to note is that if somebody has been given a terminal diagnosis, realistically, they haven't been well for a while beforehand. So in terms of the decisions that might be made, the processes that might be followed, you know, the various things that actually there's been a period of time that maybe things haven't gone as well. So sometimes having that immediate, and I'm working with an organization at the moment where it's something similar, where somebody actually had to leave immediately and they really had no time to really prepare, apart from giving a 2-page kind of here's where everything is. But what that actually allowed is for a fresh pair of eyes to look at everything and to go, okay, where exactly are we at with regard to our internal maybe audit of how we do things? Do we have effectively like the Bible of how the organization functions? Does each department, does each role? And allowing that kind of, I suppose, the fresh eyes to do that means that when the person hopefully comes back healthy, or at least in a place of knowing whether their diagnosis is a terminal one, or are they ever going to return to the organization, is by having that fresh pair of eyes actually allows for a little bit more reflection to go, okay, so this is where we're at. Actually, what is working? What's not working? And then how can we learn? And as you rightly said, that tacit institutional knowledge. How do we ensure that we're not losing that when people themselves leave? What I would also say is that when people leave an organization, they're not necessarily gone, because again, I'm a big believer in terms of the energy that we attach to different things in our life and different aspects of our life, hence the legacy, is that when we leave an organization, if we have had a bad experience, that stays with us. And inevitably, that comes out in conversations. It may come out in a comparison of, oh, well, in the last organization I worked in, we did this, but this way is much better. The people that leave an organization are its ambassadors. So ideally, if we can get the feedback as to, well, why are people leaving? Is it better pay, better benefits? Is it a better opportunity? Is there an opportunity to provide such an opportunity within the organization? I would always feel that once somebody has come to resign, they've already left. They may be still there for another month or 3 months, but they have energetically left because they're now looking forward to their next opportunity and their next venture starting. So how we can ensure that when people decide to leave, that it's not taken personally, but it's actually respected and also given that opportunity to get feedback. Well, what's working well? What's not working well? If you had stayed, what would you like to have seen changed? And where did we maybe, I suppose, drop the ball that forced you to feel that somewhere else was better? By always getting that feedback ensures that we can always look at our business to be better, to look at the systems, to look at the way that we, like the culture in the organization as well. Is it a positive organization? Is it a negative one? How do people feel working there? And how do people feel who have left? And I think that's really important, and especially for bringing in successors. Like if you think about, I always think like the football situation is incredibly brutal. You bring in a new manager, and if after a certain number of matches they haven't performed, then they're gone and a new manager comes in. But it is also looking at what is the culture of the organization? What's the culture of the team? You talk about training rightly, is that how are people being continually upskilled? And how are they allowed to actually bring those learnings into the workplace? Because we can all go on, you know, 1-day training programs as a tick box exercise. And I think the one that I always find very entertaining is time management training. It's like, you can't manage time. We all have the same 24 hours in the day, same 7 days in the week. How we actually manage our actions. So it's more the project management, the Lean Six Sigma. It's more about actually effectively managing what we do rather than the timeline with which we have to do it. And I think that's where we can better understand the volume of work and responsibility that each role has, and the ability of that person to enact what's expected from them, but where are we potentially adding and adding and adding more things to them that they become overwhelmed, they become burnt out, they become sick, and then they leave. So again, it is looking at the functioning of an organization, regardless of who's there, but then looking at the people in the roles to determine how can we get the best from them, how can we give the best to them, and how can we ensure that not only are we providing mentoring opportunities for them to learn that institutional knowledge from those more senior, and I don't mean senior as in hierarchically, but people that have been there longer, but how can we also do what's called reverse mentoring, whereas we might be bringing in a more diverse workplace or a workforce. How can we actually learn from them? How can we better support people that may have specific needs, may be coming from different communities, different backgrounds? How can we ensure that we can actually use that to enrich the workforce and the workplace, that we actually become a better community as a whole?
Yeah, I've loved listening to you. I have to say, I think everything you said is superb. But I also think so much within companies is cultural. And that, again, affects everything from the training, the mentoring, the actually coming together, the cohesion of the teams, of everybody involved. And so I think culture is a huge part in anything that you're talking about, really, and whether or not a company wants to ensure that it has that succession. Because I've also worked places, as you say, and it's things that then come out afterwards, where it's quite obvious that they don't really want to train, because a lot of people are fearful sometimes of too much training of those below them will in fact lose them their jobs. But if it's all done correctly, it should never be that way. It should enhance. People shouldn't then be fearful of somebody better coming in or new skill sets, and actually accepting and embracing that. So if somebody is wanting to find out more from you or get in touch with you, how do they do that?
So they can contact me through my website, which is livinglegacy.ie. There's also the opportunity to download a brochure that will give a bit of an insight in terms of the work that we do. On the website itself, it breaks it down into the different services. So whether it is coaching and mentoring, succession planning, end-of-life planning, and legacy building. And then you can also find out, like, who are you? So you might be an individual, you might be a family, a business owner, an enterprise. So how do these services relate to you as well? We also have a newsletter that I issue twice a month. So on the new moon and the full moon. And because I always hear people that say, oh, we have a bi-weekly newsletter. And I just feel new moon, full moon has relevance for us all, because it's always about the time of a newness, but also the time of completion. So how do we actually hold ourselves accountable to that? I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and haven't tried, I think I'm also on Twitter, but I haven't tried any of the others because I just feel A, too old, and B, I'm not technically gifted. So people can also email info@Living Legacy, but the social media platforms are at livinglegacy.ie, but they can contact me. And if they want to just have a discovery call to learn a bit more about what we do and how it's relevant to their needs, then we can also ensure that, you know, ideally, if we can help them, great. And if not, maybe we can direct them to other services that may better suit their needs.
Wonderful. That's lovely. Jennifer, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. So thank you very much for all of your fantastic knowledge that you've shared with us today.
Thanks so much, Dale. It's been a pleasure.